Thank you, Amitendu. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a very wide coverage of the entire budget process. Just about all sectors, all aspects have been covered. The panelists have spoken in detail about each of these. I'm sure you have a large number of questions on this. We have about roughly 50 minutes, 50 minutes, in which we can share some views. Any issues that you would like to raise, any comments that you would like to make, you are not open. Let's go ahead. We have mics on both sides. You could walk up to the mic and identify yourself and raise your question or make your comment. Yes, please.
Thank you very. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, all the panelists, for a wonderful, everybody covering mostly everything, all aspects actually of the budget. One thing which I probably agree with Jahangir is on the, and I would disagree on you as you said that most of you would, on the public investment versus the corporate investment. But there are the challenges which, and this is more of an opinion which can be probably clarified or questions can be revolved around that, is on the corporate spending and with what the banks are going through, right? So the whole cycle of actually, curtailing the lending, given the NPAs and the current challenges in the global environment, it's restricting banks to actually lend money out to corporates, and then corporates in turn are not able to put in their investment, is kind of leading to a lot of challenges for that, and hence we don't see so much of traction happening towards that. And so the burden lies on the public sector to do something more in that, right? And so that is a challenge. NPAs as 25,000 crores in capitalization, but that is not the answer in the long run. I feel personally, I mean, we have done it, we had to do it, there's no choice. Bad loan bank may not, and I'm not one who wants to see that, because that means you're incentivizing the banks to do bad loans and then give it to the bad bank to manage it, right? So I think there has to be a prudence which has to come in amongst the banks in how best they do their due diligence, how best they ramp up in the given circumstances. And secondly, I think just on the aspect of healthcare, the spending which we are doing is 1.5% is what we're saying. India is adding in Australia every year to its population. So it does make it very difficult for ramping up the infrastructural capabilities in the public healthcare system. And plus also it's across the segments, right? The rural segment and the mid-market segment. So that is another challenge which I feel. And thirdly, I think if somebody can also talk about the defense expenditure, which has increased, but only to a certain extent, not to by a great percentage. And I know that there has been challenges for the government in doing that, but given the current scenario, what do you feel about that? Thank you.
Let me start off with the last. Excuse me. Let me start off with. Sorry. Let me start off with the last question. I haven't the faintest idea about defense expenditure. I have no idea whether you should buy night goggles or something else, so I'm going to leave that aside. The problem with the banking system is, I think all of us in this panel will agree, is far bigger than just recapitalizing it. Back in the 1970s, as Amitendu said, if India can denationalize it with a very big step, there was a reason as to why you wanted to nationalize banks. You needed the savers and the investors to be brought together. Today, I don't think public sector banks need to do that. Private sector banks can bring together savers and investors, more or less. You don't need State Bank of India to have a branch in Churchgate anymore. But you need public sector banks to do policy lending, to do priority lending. Therefore, whether you wanted to, whether India does it today or tomorrow, public sector banks will have to be restructured, They will have to get out of the business of being resource mobilizers to just being policy development banks. And large parts of the public sector banks will have to be sold. No one wants to do that. But that is the inevitability. Now we can postpone it by putting in 25,000 crores or changing the regulatory changes that the RBI did I think this week, which added a little bit more on the capital. But this game can't go on forever. And that is the inevitability, and we are just postponing that. For obvious political reasons, we are postponing that. But beyond the political reason, I also think there is a reason as to why the government is very reluctant to do that. Public sector banks have been captive sources of financing India's budget for a very long time. And if you take the public sector banks away, if you go and list LIC and GIC, you're going to lose your captive source of financing. So there are these two big things that the reason I think it's not happening the same way. That's the inevitability. So my sense is that sooner or later we will have to do it. And 25,000 crores is pitiful given the scale of the problem. But that's, I think, the best I think the government can do. The RBI is very reluctant for public sector banks to be recapitalized without restructuring. I think that's the other problem, and that's the right approach to take.
Brief comment on the banking. I think, yes, absolutely, it's recapitalization is obviously not just the only thing that should be on the table. And as I like Amitendu's word, denationalization rather than privatization. But I think I think recapitalization has to be one of the early steps. At the moment, the bank NPAs, if you add them up, is bigger than the market value of the banks. So if you buy a share in an Indian bank, you're actually already in negative equity at the moment. So if you were to sort of denationalize them without first recapitalizing them, without raising their value, I think you're basically doing a fire sale. So I think you need to avoid that. I agree with Jahangir that it's going to be politically very difficult. Bank unions, are they going to be up in arms against sort of denationalization or privatization, as they will probably see it. So I think the answer really partly lies in more aggressively expanding entry. Let others enter. Let more of the others enter. There's no reason why the state-owned banking system should own 75% of banking assets. This is crazy. So I think the Reserve Bank should just be much more liberal with giving licenses. And I think slowly you will find a lot of the business going away, as it has. I mean, I think by and large the private banks have done pretty well with a couple of exceptions. And I think if you aggressively expand entry, it will be good for the public banks as well.
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Rohan Solapurkar about black money, euphemistically called voluntary disclosure. I know that this government has made a claim for itself as a squeaky clean government, so there probably is a political motive behind this idea, but the idea is not particularly new. I mean, by some calculations, the size of India's black money is probably the same as the white money. And if a significant part of it could be brought out, that would be a terrific source of investment. But from what I understood from your presentation, it has not been a particularly successful effort. There are three questions that I would like to ask as to why. First of all, I'm only a political scientist, I have no idea how these percentages are calculated. Why is 30% plus the optimal percent? Second, is there a guarantee that once you declare yourself as a holder of black money, that the taxman will not go after you for the bit that you have not disclosed? I mean, is there a method where once you have declared, you are given a clean sheet. Third, someone who handles black money must be a very competent and rational person to have survived. What is his incentive to give in to this offer? Thank you.
So let me try and answer all three. Let me take the second one first. In India, there is no guarantee of anything, especially when it comes to tax. You can have a government overturn a Supreme Court ruling under the pretext of trying to amend the law, saying it's always been there, and this is now clarification. So, to answer your question, is there a guarantee that the taxpayer or the tax authorities will not come after you? Difficult to answer. Having said that, I still think in the past there have been amnesty schemes. This is not the first time they're doing it. Other governments have also introduced it, and I think they've been pretty successfully run and managed. They've managed to mop up a fair amount of investment. There was a scheme that was introduced, I think, a couple of months back for people who were living overseas who wanted to come and disclose their assets and black money. That was a scheme that did not take off very well. Now, the tax rate under that scheme was 60%. They said that if you've got money that you've undisclosed in India, we will give you an amnesty, you come clean, but we will tax you at 60%. Now, the only rationale I see for coming down at 30% is maybe because the offtake on that was not good. So therefore, they anticipate that if we do it at the current maximum marginal rate, which is 30, and we have an interest and penalty topped up on that, coming up to 45%, maybe the offtake will be higher. Mind you, the window is only about 3 or 4 months for this entire scheme, in terms of from the time it becomes operational to the time it comes to a close. So that anticipation is there. So why 30%? I think that's the only logical answer that I can have. Okay. Sorry, what is the third part of it?
What is the incentive?
The incentive, under the Indian tax law, the way it reads today, there is no provision for arrest. Okay, so the only sort of scare that you can put into a person is that if I don't pay taxes, I will arrest you. I will put you behind bars. You might see a change in that, where people come and pay their taxes more correctly or accurately. But under the current system that is there, there is no regulation which says that I will arrest you under the Income Tax Act. You can levy penalties and you can go back to appeals and all of that. But I think the incentive seems to be at this point of time where the government is saying that if you are not coming clean and you don't disclose it, we will make sure that our people will come after you. And if we come after you, then the levy of penalty can go as high up to 300%. Okay? So penalties go up to 300%, interest charges go significantly high. So this is sort of a one-time saying we will give you this benefit if you come clean. That's the only sort of incentive which I think that's there. And this was the incentive which was there in the past also, where people came out and disclosed their money.
Let me make an attempt to answer that incentive part of it. I'm not a tax expert. I'm Lakshman, the common man. The biggest appetite for black money in India is in the real estate sector, where today any transaction which is made in purchase or sale of real estate, only 50% is declared. Often the thing will be how much check, how much cash. Now what happens is, if I need to buy property, I have tons, and as you said, Professor Mitra, I'm a superman, I've handled a huge amount of black money, I have tons of black money on one side. I have kilos only of white money or check money. I have to buy a property, and the circle rate is a rate which has been fixed by government. I have to necessarily pay that circle rate with, as is known as, white money. So though I have tons of black money, I can't put together that white amount. And if I pay 45% on the tons that I have got, I generate a certain amount of white money at least where I can enter into transactions. Today, the property market in India is very depressed. And if I can turn black into white or whatever through government, which is the most credible form of it, I am in a position to be able to corner some real estate and hopefully over a period of time, when it sees the upside, make some, if not a kill on it, some money I can. So basically it's a question of trying to ensure that I have the check amount with me. There was one question earlier on defense expenditure, which I went unanswered, if I could have a go at that. See, defense expenditure, the biggest notoriety about defense provisions and defense expenditure is you provide huge amounts, it goes unspent. And invariably, it's in the last month or the last fortnight of the financial year that the defense ministry starts to try and park its money into various public sector enterprises or agencies where it doesn't lapse. Now, huge amount of defense expenditure, just as Amitendu said about the finance minister's flexibility on funds, 73% or 70% that you talked about, is committed expenditure, which is otherwise known as revenue expenditure, which means salaries, interest payments, committed installments of purchases made or payments to be made to shipyards and defense PSUs, etc. It's a very small proportion that goes into capital. And capital expenditure is always on an installment basis. So I think he's taken a very realistic viewpoint, where he's increased defense expenditure by about 7 or 8% below. Yeah, it's single digit. It's single digit. He's not expecting, but defense is a priority, I think. The feeling being, the psychology being that if required, I can cut from somewhere else and put into defense. And I think that that's the right stand to take, where, rather than go unspent, you provide ambitious amounts, huge amounts, and it goes unspent. Might as well provide a realistic amount and ensure that is spending it.
One thing on defense expenditure. This year, probably, in a sense, has been the biggest for defense because you have had the one rank, one pension coming in. Technically, from a finance minister's perspective, there is no bigger defense expenditure because that is something that he's committed to.
And he doesn't know how much that is.
Yeah.
He doesn't know.
So just on the point that Mr. Rai was mentioning about real estate. So we can't catch hold of black money through taxes, etc. But we can catch them because real estate is the only place where you can keep it. Which is why real estate should have been in the GST. If you put real estate in GST, you get rid of half the problems of using it as a vehicle for black money. And there is complete political consensus that property should not be under GST. That was true under UPA when it was introduced. That's true under BJP. This is the reason why I have huge problems with the current structure of the GST. And my other point is that, we all talk about black money should be brought in, etc. My problem is that I don't see the government giving the government money to the government. They will spend it any better than the person who has the black money. I mean, you've seen governments for the last 70 years. Do you really think that you give them 45% of GDP, they'll actually spend it more wisely? So.
Yes.
I have a question on poem, that is place of effective management. This I think ideally would be answered by Mr. Rohan. This was left out in this year's budget, although earlier there was a great hullabaloo about this topic being addressed in this budget. My two questions on this would be, what do you think would be the reason for not bringing up in this budget? And secondly, if implemented, what could be the consequences, A, for the revenue department and B, for the corporates?
Right. So to answer your first question as to why it was deferred, so it's deferred by 1 more year. Right? I think there's been a little pushback from the industry on the ground that, we have to get our act together, basically. As well as the government recognizes the fact that, Indian corporates would need some time to get their act together. So it's giving both of them, the revenue as well as the taxpayer, some time to try and manage their affairs in such a way that you can get out of this place of effective management. Because place of effective management, mind you, is a very wide sort of provision. And just, I'll take a minute for the audience to understand what this place of effective management means. It essentially means that in the past, India used to tax you or treat you as a tax resident if your control and management was based in India. They then wanted to change this to say that you become a tax resident if your place of effective management is in India. So to give you an example, you have an Indian corporate which has a subsidiary in Singapore. As we all know, most of the decision-making process of that Indian subsidiary which is based in Singapore happens in India, which means that the Singapore subsidiary is actually a tax resident of India, because the place of effective management of Singapore is India. Now, if that Singapore subsidiary is doing trading and having billions of dollars in trade and volumes and revenues and therefore very profitable, that entire profit would get taxed in India. So that's the significance of having a place of effective management definition. So it's essentially to give each other time to manage their affairs, and I think that's the reason why it's been deferred. The significance and the importance of this, as I just gave you via the example, this is a significant move because you will have companies which are based in Singapore and other locations which potentially then can get taxed in India. If they get taxed in India, they end up paying a 30% tax there on their income. So you need to make sure now that control, decision-making, risk, reward, all of it lies separately outside of India and doesn't get linked back to India. So impact for the corporate, impact for the revenue, I think the revenue is going to challenge it at any point of time because they will see this as a sort of, garnering and gathering as much revenue as they can. So you've got to keep your record straight. You'll have to have far more documentation to demonstrate that you've got decision-making happening overseas, you've got an independent board overseas, you've got people who are competent enough to make decisions relating to your subsidiaries and offices overseas.
Thank you. Yeah. There we go.
My question is directed to Dr. Aziz. If I may take the liberty of painting a scenario, and this is in the domain of addressing the huge deficit in infrastructure finance. So the banks are massively over-leveraged and saddled with non-performing loans. All the major domestic infra players are also heavily over-leveraged. Beyond capacity and even in terms of capabilities, they're massively overstretched. One of the reforms was in the domain of public-private partnerships, and thus establishing a public grievance system. That's just a band-aid, isn't it? I mean, it's just addressing a symptom of the problem rather than more deep-rooted structural problems that exist with all PPP projects in India. And the track record has thus far been sobering at best. I mean, there's nothing that's taken off in the roads sector for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. At the same time, on the brighter side of things, the global system, financial system, is awash with liquidity, looking for profitable avenues. Do you see, I mean, if you were to gaze into a crystal ball or from a policy perspective, do you see any way out of this conundrum? I mean, where can the funding possibly come in? Particularly from another private sector player, I mean, unless it's a sovereign wealth fund which is willing to take a bit more risk than a private sector entity. Thank you.
So you're right that, one of the biggest problems have been the structure of the PPP contracts. So one of the ways out is to restructure these PPP contracts. If you look at the manner in which these PPP contracts have been changed over the last, 15 years, there is the entire upside of any contract. Almost all of it lies with the government. And all the downside on the cost side lies with the private sector partner, which is what happened when the coal and the coal mines could not deliver, when Coal India could not deliver coal at the MOU prices, and the entire system. So one way out is to have a better or fairer sharing of risks. So that's something that's been in the pipeline for many, many years. It hasn't really been, brought into play. There are questions about how the private side, of course, prices these things over the lifetime of the project. So there's serious questions with the PPP contractual arrangements. The other thing where I think is a quick fix, and which is where I prefer the government to do public investment, but not by building road itself or building the infrastructure itself, is to take existing PPP projects that are languishing and basically say, I'm going to up my contribution to these stalled PPP projects. So you still do public investment, but you do it through by getting the PPP projects that are stalled going. So that's a quick fix to do it, but the government hasn't done that. The bigger question at the end of the day ends up being, there is a certain amount of public investment in infrastructure that a government has to do and provide it free. You can't have, all roads cannot be toll roads. All hospitals cannot be fee-based hospitals. World Bank, I have been IMF for a long time, World Bank will tell you that everything should be fee-based. In a country with 400 million people living below $1 a day, you cannot have that. China has tried doing that and has had serious problems once every road became a toll road. So there is a certain amount you have to do free. There is a certain amount you can actually price it out. And I think with a part that can price it out, which is these contractual arrangements and tolls, I think there is a problem. You can recontract them out. But having said all of that, there is a part of public infrastructure that governments will have to do and provide it free. Otherwise, you cannot run the country.
About any prospects for international capital under what scenario? Because it looks pretty bleak on that front, doesn't it?
So infrastructure projects have had such a bad name in the last 2-3 years. But just after the global financial crisis, when the oil exporting countries, sovereign wealth funds, were looking for avenues, and when oil prices was $110, there was an opportunity to get them. You could even package infrastructure fund as Sharia compliant projects, and you could get a serious amount of money. We didn't do it at that time. Now, with oil price at $30 a barrel, those sovereign wealth funds do not have the funds. Given exactly what he said, almost every infrastructure company is up to the necks with debt. And the other problem that has happened is that over the last 15-20 years, we haven't created a second tier of infrastructure companies who could come and say, okay, I'm going to buy out these bad, these are all good projects. You're just running into debt problems. I'm going to pay the 70 cents to the dollar and buy them out. But there aren't any second tier infrastructure companies that we have created. So, and therefore, who's going to buy it? Only the foreigners. The foreigners aren't going to come at this point. Sorry, Mr. Rai, you were saying something.
Yeah. Jahangir, the auditor inside me militates against the argument that you just said. So I have to be loyal to the government who has fed me for the last 40 years. PPP is not necessarily a panacea. It's been tried and it's not really succeeded in large parts of the world. Let's go back to the experience of PPP in India. One of the first that we did, if you don't remember, it was Enron. The blame has to be taken by folks like me, bureaucrats who were part of the designing or architecture of the concession agreement, the contractual agreement that we talked about. It was heavily loaded in favor of the foreign. And I say that because I didn't design it, but I was a part, I think we were left by them, of resolving the so-called Dabhol Power Company problem in 2002-2003, when all of them had shown their heels and we were stuck with arbitration proceedings, etc. And when we went through the concession agreement clause by clause, we found everything was structured such that it was any dispute arising was in favor of the foreign partner. Well, that was an experience. We probably didn't learn from that experience. But infrastructure companies, the ones that you talked about, which are heavily in debt, which were these infrastructure companies? Large number of these mushroomed out of Hyderabad, Andhra. I don't mean anything to the place, but they came out of there heavily over-leveraged financially. Each one of them borrowed much more than, didn't even put in the kind of equity that they were supposed to do. It was a fault of the banking system. The banking system didn't take them on. But all of them have written off their losses, not against equity, but against debt. That's the new kind of model that India is seeing. That the promoter, original promoter, goes scot-free. There was a statement made by the chairman of the LIC that when they come to us to take long gestation loans from us, long tenor loans from us, they come in Maruti 800 cars. When they come to us for restructuring it or writing it off or a one-time settlement, they come in their Mercedes. Why? He was criticized for it, of course, but it was a statement of fact, and that's just what has happened. Infrastructure, unfortunately, has become a bad name in the country, largely because of the way it was designed and because a large number of companies, let me say oil exploration, airports, maybe some of them, the upside was to be taken by government, but the modus operandi was bid competitively, get the contract, get the approval. Once you've got the approval, then of course, post-contract, post-approval,
Cost
seek
escalation.
concessions, seek exemptions. And what was the exemption? The size of the kitty from which the upside the government was to be getting was contracting. Came down to 55%, 60%. Where was it in anything in the government? So the intent in a public-private partnership is very important. Government has suffered because of inexperience or whatever,
Right.
and the intent is the issue which.
So I was responding to his question that what has happened, and you're exactly right. I think, especially 2010 onwards, the reaction went to the other direction, which is what I was trying to say, because of all these experiences in the past. But I think fundamentally the problem with infrastructure financing is that banks cannot give you more than 1-2 year loans because their liabilities are short term. The only way out is to have a corporate bond market. And every government, every budget, even within budget, have all promised that the corporate bond market in India, they are going to do things to develop. We have probably written about 20 white papers and about 10 different committees over the last 50 years of how to expand the corporate bond market, deeper in the corporate bond market. Nothing has happened in the corporate. There is no secondary market in corporate bonds. And one of the reasons goes back to what Mr. Khanna said at the beginning, that India's system is so bank heavy that banks and the regulator of the bank, which I'm sorry to say this, are always protecting the ones that they regulate from disintermediation. There is a tremendous amount of fear that if corporate bond market opens up, bank disintermediation would be massive. So there's bureaucratic reasons, there is political reasons, there are reasons, Asia doesn't do corporate bond well. We do equity very well, we do banking very well, we never do corporate. But if we don't do corporate bonds well, it is going to be only possible to get around what Mr. Rai talked about. If you want to get rid of PPP projects, you have to have an alternative long-term source of funding, and that can only be provided by corporate bond. If you go back to, and I was watching this PBS documentary about the people who built America, the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, they did not go for, the entire railroad system, etc., was built by corporate bond market back in the 1850s. And in 2016, we are still struggling to put together a corporate bond market.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. We have 5 minutes more, I'm told. Anybody, we can take one probably? Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I think this is going to be a bit long-winded, so please bear with me. One, I do feel inadequate speaking in front of and tossing out these ideas to a panel that's absolutely illustrious and has made some beautiful points. In fact, I loved what Dr. Jahangir said about private consumption probably not happening and public expenditure never being able to make up for it. But let me throw out a few points. And these stem more from, again, a caveat. The second part of this title, not as much budget 2016, but the Indian economy as a whole. Some of these are observations, and I would have loved to see the panel debated at length. One, in terms of the intent, and I think at least three of the panel spoke of the intent. Now, I feel most of these intents and signals as important as my own New Year resolutions of shedding weight. You see the effect here. Now, how many of you have actually seen, and what are your takes on intent actually translating to action? Case in point, I've seen several of Mr. Rai's astute observations as a CAG. How many of them has he actually seen being acted on? What does he leave with in terms of a personal feeling of satisfaction or dissatisfaction? Are we not discussing the biggest elephant in the room, which is an inept, ineffective, and probably overburdened judicial and quasi-judicial system? Because until that sets right, a bulk of the Indian economy and all the points that get tossed around ad nauseum as part of the budget year on year is probably going to fall flat on its face. I don't see much of a difference between the last 3 or 4 budgets and this. Yes, there are these nitties-gritties, but it really comes down to listening to Chitrahar during Holi. It's the same bunch of songs again and again. Nothing gets implemented and nothing gets changed. Point 2. In terms of being what we are as India, and I'm talking of Rohan's point, for instance, on what can happen in terms of getting the legalities going for something like a Google. Let's face it, if you're talking of an extremely capitalist or a seemingly capitalist republic like the US of A, they brought 2 banks in, go find them 11 billion and 12 billion each, no questions asked. I would call it extortion. The Economist called it extortion. Why aren't we extorting? I'm sure there are enough and more rules that have been easily flouted. And every time something comes up for a corporate discussion, it's the Vodafone case that keeps getting spoken of, and they've still not paid up a paisa. Now, if we really aren't made of the metal or lack the guts as India and as a country to go out and draw all of this in, why are we even talking black money? Black money lists were got out from Switzerland as a government by the US with the tap of a button. Now, I don't know whether the button is a nuclear button or a collider, but they got it. We still haven't. The latest list is still reeking of HSBC private bank lists and nothing more. So if we really can't get there, why are we even discussing these intents and walking away with the reconciliation quotient at the right extreme? I think a lot of these basic mythical assumptions made when you're going out and analyzing a budget or the Indian economy have to be wrecked. I'd love that debate too, by the way. The third, my own observation is, and I'd love to have your view. I'll speed this up.
Yeah.
The federal state structure that we're functioning with as India has completely collapsed. We just aren't making any change to the same. We are painting every state, every region with the same brush, which just doesn't work. I mean, to quote the late Prime Minister of this country, it's 29 different countries that is being governed by a federal government. The real estate bill or the GST bill can pass with a lot more support if you actually go out and give the states their due. It just doesn't seem to be even analyzed as an option. Now, are we going to do anything about it, or are we going to sit here on the next budget and discuss why the Indian economy never got affected by the budget in the first place? The next observation is one about employment. I think Dr. Amitendu did touch upon it. But if about 15 million, 1.5 crore people are not going to get jobs, this demographic dividend we talk of 25 to 35 is adrenaline and testosterone pouring out of their ears and rebellion ready to happen. If people don't have jobs, forget the percentages that get spent for housing, that get spent for food, we have a bigger social problem on our hands. Every time we seem to be completely divorcing societal activity, social implications, and compulsions, not to be confused with political compulsions, which are very many, with the Indian economy. I think it's terribly related. I felt jittery, and it's not that I have anything against any political party or a government. I felt jittery when the Prime Minister goes out, quotes the preamble, and removes the word socialist. I'd love to have your view on what this means. In a country where Gini coefficient is probably trending at about 0.48 and pushing higher, if we were to believe those figures, I think I'll be seriously worried if opportunities are not given capitalistically and distribution is not happening socially. So, a view on that, because all of these do have implications for the Indian economy, if you may. One last point. And one last point I'd love debate, or should I just leave it here? Probably, and that was just an observation. Rural economy and rural incomes going up by 2022. I'm only left to remark, seeing the way the Sensex has been reconstituted, NSE has been reconstituted, the statistical office has gone ahead and done the GDP. For all you know, the definition of rural might change year 4, 5, 6. And there you have it. So I really don't know where that is headed. So I wouldn't as much bother about it. There are enough guys taking those strategic calls. I also would love to know if as a panel you have any suggestions on how this hopelessly mollycoddled segment called the corporate segment, absolute beneficiaries of the crony capitalist system for at least a decade since I can remember, is ever going to be arm twisted into providing employment, pay their dues back to the society. If all of these can be discussed, I think the second part would have more relevance on the first.
Thank you. Thank you for this lovely observations. I wish these had been raised at 4 o'clock. We could have debated them, and we could have debated them to satisfy you. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to react to any of these, because if we start debating them, we'll overrun time in so many manners. Just one issue on intent. Since you asked me personally, I'd say I'm very satisfied by the observation which have been raised. And I'll give you a classic example. The entire purpose of audit objections or audit observations is to introduce transparency. Why has the finance minister brought into his receipt budget 99,000 crores as the receipts from Spectrum 4G sale? Because he has introduced transparency now, and that money which was being spent earlier but was not finding its way into the government treasury is now coming into the budget. As against barely 14,000 crores which he had provided earlier. Why is it that we are going in for auctions now? Earlier there was no such thing as an auction. It was first come, first sale, and that too being managed by a ministry or whatever it was. Why are coal blocks getting that much of money? There is an intent, there is being, so I would suggest that we could debate this, let's do it outside and let's do it person to person. There is no scope to be as cynical as you've been. Be positive, and I can assure you that the success that you are seeing on your New Year resolution will find fruition. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we had a great debate, and we now need to wind it up.
Thank you, Mr. Rai and the distinguished speakers for their insightful thoughts. This is to conclude the ISAS panel discussion for today. Thank you. On behalf of ISAS, I thank you for your presence, and we look forward to seeing you again for our next ISAS event. Please join us for a tea reception outside. Thank you. Oh, okay. There's a vote of thanks, which, sorry, I was not updated.
Vote of thanks.
We can't let you depart without a formal vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had an extensive, comprehensive, probably a little exhausting debate of a very controversial theme, and I compliment the panel for the convivial tone of the conversations here. On behalf of the ISAS community, it's my very pleasant responsibility, first of all, to thank our three guests, Dr. Jahangir Aziz, Vikram Khanna, and Rohan Solapurkar. And as director, I would like to thank very much my colleagues, Mr. Vinod Rai and Dr. Amitendu Palit, for helping organize this event and taking part in it. ISAS is an autonomous think tank, part of the NUS, and we are supported by our management board, represented here in the person of Mr. Girija Pandey. This board has the two ministries of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Industry and the NUS, as well as important members of the stakeholders of Singapore in it. And with their support, we are able to organize at very short notice important events like this. Allow me to tell you how important this event has been for me as director, because I'm new to Singapore, and it has given me an opportunity to see where ISAS can play a role. Two important issues have to be here profiled. First, India is different from Singapore in an important way. Mr. Vinod Rai made this point. It's a state. India is not a developmental state, unlike Singapore or post-war Japan, for example. A developmental state is one where the big ideas are defined by an elite which sets up a structure, and within that structure, everyday politics takes place. In India, everything is up for grabs. That's the nature of Indian politics, which is why the budget conversations start way ahead of time, speculations, disappointments, and ultimately relief that the thing has happened. Now, this is a very significant achievement in the sense that development in transitional societies requires major sacrifices on the part of people who have a right to vote. Think of taking land away from someone. Think of extracting the surplus from workers. These are people who have the right to vote. So expect them to participate in development is a bit like asking Turkeys to vote for Christmas. And the fact is that this is what we learn from this budget conversation. It happens. In spite of it all, and this is a quotation from Galileo used by a very great author on Indian politics called Maurice Jones. He quotes Galileo that the whole solar system, Earth, they're sort of very complicated systems, and Galileo says, looking at the Earth, a puracy mover, it still moves. So India still moves, and why it moves, how it moves, this is the second point I would like to make, is the business of ISAS. It's our job to be a two-way looking glass, Singapore to South Asia and South Asia to Singapore. And the last question brought out some of these issues are things that we are working on. Our 3Ds are democracy, diplomacy and development, and the entanglement, not just for India, but for South Asia as a whole, which is why on Sunday with a few colleagues, I'll be going to Lahore to connect to Pakistan. These are things we do, these are things we publish, and if you have liked this conversation, I invite you to look forward, this would be available on our net, to a resume of this conversation in the form of a report. I hope you will stay connected to us, and I'll take this opportunity to thank the ultimate stakeholder for Singapore, which is, dear audience, the Singapore taxpayer. It's your support which makes us take the roadshow, not just to the Treasury building, which is where one of our main stakeholders, the Minister of Trade and Industry, is located, but also where the action is. We go to Chennai, we go to Delhi, now we go to Lahore, and we'll go wherever there is work to be done for Singapore, for South Asia, and for South Asia, for Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us, and I invite you all to join us outside for a little bit of networking. Thank you.